All right, we'll just wait to hear. All right, so we are live. So good evening, everybody, and welcome again to Labor Live at 5 on Mondays. We come to you every week, Labor Live AF for the younger folks among us, and it's pretty tough times that we're living through right now. Unfortunately, what was so obvious at the time, and we were hoping we were wrong, has come to pass. And because the governor chose to open things up so early and prematurely, even with respect to his own measures of what it would be required before they would open, we went ahead and opened, and now we're unfortunately seeing the scientific reality of what we're dealing with, which is rampant virus contagion in many, many areas of the state. And so workers, again, are being the ones on the front lines, being exposed to this, having to grapple with it, again, having to make decisions about working versus protecting their families. We see the Workforce Commission pressing on, undeterred to eliminate the special protections that people had to deal with things in the pandemic in some kind of way to assert that we're living in normal times. So I know everybody's having a hard time working through all this, and one group of folks, actually more than one group of folks, but one group of folks that's directly impacted because the Texas Education Agency has indicated that they're moving full speed ahead back to opening up our campuses in the fall, is our educators, our teachers, our classified personnel, our students, and ultimately our community. And so here tonight to visit with us is somebody that I'm really, really excited to get to talk to and really excited for y'all to hear from. Alejandra Lopez is the president of the San Antonio Alliance and recently elected, but longtime fighter for justice in the teachers union. And thank you so much, Alejandra, for joining us tonight. We really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's an honor to be here.
You might be frozen. So,
I appreciate you, Rick, taking the time.
So let's talk a little bit. First, tell us. It's really our privilege to have you, Alejandra. So tell us a little bit about your union. Who do you represent? Where are you located? Things like that.
Sure. So the San Antonio Alliance of Teachers and Support Personnel, we are a wall-to-wall local in San Antonio. We represent educators, paras, classified workers in San Antonio ISD. So our district encompasses the urban center of San Antonio. We have about 48,000 students within our district. And so we represent, everyone from our food service workers, bus drivers, to the teachers in our classrooms.
Wow. Great. So we can't talk about your local union without acknowledging the person who served in that position before you, because she's one of my heroes in the labor movement, Shelley Potter, who I think laid a lot of the groundwork for what we're doing, what we're talking about today. But if you would just extend our well wishes to Shelley, and I hope she's doing well in her retirement. She's probably as busy as she ever was because she kind of tends to fight for justice regardless of where she is, but just definitely want to honor her service and all that she's given to the labor movement there. And I'm sure that feels important to you too.
Absolutely. We are so fortunate to have had Shelley, fighting this fight within our district for several decades. Okay. And many of us that are...
Again, this is why it's Labor Live at 5, because we deal with things like frozen internets all the time. I'm sorry, Alejandra, could you want to repeat that? Because I think you were kind of frozen for a second.
Sure. So yeah, we are very privileged in our union to have someone like Sally Potter, who has been at the center of the labor movement in San Antonio for so long. And many of us are directly involved in our union because of her creating space for us
Maybe
to
it's me that's
organize.
frozen. We'll see. Anyway, we'll press on and go forward. Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay. I think maybe it's my problem. So I apologize. Maybe it's just on my computer. I don't look frozen. I mean, I don't even feel frozen because it's hot. But anyway, let's try again and we'll see what we do. Okay. Thanks everybody for just sticking with us on that. So we just talked about Shelly and now we're talking about y'all. So, and I'm getting all these texts and comments to saying, we can hear Alejandra fine. What's wrong with you? So, okay. All right. We're good. Okay. People are yelling at me. Okay. Here we go. We're fine. We're going to start again. Okay. So Alejandra, when, what have y'all been dealing with? I guess, first of all, coming on last spring when school was ending, how are y'all dealing with the virus and what was going on in the schools then?
Yeah, so, from the beginning, we have really been advocating for the health and safety of our staff, of our students, of our families to be at the center of decision making. So when the decision was made to transition to distance learning, in light of the pandemic, we were, supportive of that move. However, we do have many frontline essential workers, as you mentioned. So hazard pay is something that we have been pushing since the beginning of this pandemic. Retroactive hazard pay, as well as a continuation of hazard pay. The hazard pay for our district ended, when the first phase of reopening began at the end of May. And our argument is that we know, according to public health experts, that from one day to the next, the risk is not reduced. So that is a fight that is very important to our local that we're going to continue to fight for. But the transition to distance learning was also a real, a challenge. But I will say that educators across our district did a fantastic job in ensuring not only that our students' academic needs were met, but more importantly, that our students' social emotional needs were met. And we saw educators all across the district really pushing for, the lessons that we were providing for our students. Because at the time, I was a second grade teacher. I was also involved in this transition. So I feel like that's really valuable experience. We push to say this is a pandemic. Our students are experiencing a whole wide range of emotions, and it's our responsibility to help really guide them through. And that needs to be the priority right now. The academic stuff is important, but what really needs to guide us is meeting the social emotional needs of our students.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, one of the frustrating things for me, I recall when the governor first made his decisions to reopen Texas, the information that I was seeing showed that if we did that, then what we were likely going to have was a surge that was going to be just in time for schools. And that what we should have been doing at all costs was to make sure that we were prepared for when school opened in the fall. And now we see, unfortunately, that the surge is happening just as we're starting to get ready to start getting ready for schools again. And obviously now we're seeing a whole different projection when it comes to schools. So tell me about your reaction when you got the recent notification from the Texas Education Agency that we were going to be opening our schools in the fall.
I think for many of us, it is a moment filled with fear and anxiety. And I think for our local specifically, when the decision from the governor to begin the process of reopening first occurred, I think we looked around and said, we really need to organize ourselves. And so it was right in the middle of May that we brought together a coalition of people. We brought together other unions in our city. We brought together parents. We brought together students, our community partners, and public health experts, because as teachers who are experts in our classroom, we understand and value that in this situation, the public health experts are experts in their field, and they're the ones that we should be looking to first. So our coalition began meeting very regularly every week to discuss school reopening, because we knew what the data said in terms of what you just stated, that if the reopening began, we were likely to be facing a very difficult circumstance in the fall. And so, we began to meet and discuss, and really guided by the principle that guides the work in our union, which is that those who are directly impacted by decisions being made need to be at the center and at the heart of that decision-making process.
Yeah, but that doesn't just happen overnight, Alejandra. And one of the things that's so encouraging about what you just talked about is you've done the work way ahead of time to actually build the relationships and build the coalition necessary to really respond in a or we just do this, but you've kind of transformed the role of what the union is and who the union really speaks for. Can you talk a little bit about your approach in that and some of the things that you're trying to accomplish in that way?
Absolutely. And this is where, of course, so much credit has to go to Shelley for, really laying the foundation of this work. And this work in our union began, kind of in earnest, about 5 years ago, when we attended and instituted it with the St. Paul's Educators Union to really talk about, how we can ensure that we're organizing around, common good demands. And that concept is that, as a union, and particularly as an education union, right, we are deeply integrated and embedded in the communities that we serve, right? And so in thinking about how we organize, we need to really transcend the boundaries of our classroom, because we know public education is under attack. We know that our working conditions are our students' learning conditions, and particularly in our district that serves overwhelmingly, working class communities of color, communities that are under-resourced, through and through, and we see the effects of that in our classroom. We know that the only way to organize effectively is to come together and discuss, where we can ensure that we're going to meet the needs of the entire community. And so that, started a lot with some immigration work that we've done in our union. We are a founding member of an immigration coalition in our city to really advocate for our undocumented community members. And actually this spring, we had planned on having a community summit to bring everyone together to really lay out a vision for public education in our city. And unfortunately with COVID, those plans, could not come to fruition. But instead, what we have is a strong coalition around school reopening, which we're very proud to be a part of.
Yeah, so tell me about that. So like when you got the announcement from the TEA, like how did that work you've done, building that coalition, building those relationships, your approach to organizing, how did that evidence itself in the way that you've responded now to the reopening?
Yeah, so one of the first things that our coalition discussed was, okay, under what circumstances and conditions do we feel safe returning to school? And the fortunate thing is that, at least part of it is listening to our public health experts. We're very fortunate that one of the parents in our district is also an epidemiologist. And works with the city, to make decisions around, the COVID situation. And so she joined our coalition and has been an immense, source of information. But we also looked around and said, this work is happening and we don't need to reinvent it. So what we did is we got the AFT, the American Federation of Teachers plan that they had, the blueprint that they had published, the NEA, the NEA's blueprint, the CDC, the Alliance to Reclaim Our Schools, which is a national organization as well. And we essentially, kind of compared these plans and ensured that, we were looking very clearly at what was common between them and what are things that, we felt strongly about, and then, tried to superimpose them specifically on our, on our county, in our city here in San Antonio, to make sure that they're kind of site specific. And so what we were ready with when the TEA made their announcement is a blueprint for safely reopening our schools. a blueprint that lays out, from a health perspective, like, very basics, like how much space between desks, personal protection equipment, but also goes into best practices for learning. And even goes into talking about like what a new normal and what it would look like to reimagine our public schools as places that truly meet the needs of our students through wraparound services, culturally relevant pedagogy, trauma-informed practices, all of these things that we know are going to be necessary to ensure that our students come through this, really challenging ordeal with what they need to be successful.
Yeah, and one of the things that was striking to me is that it wasn't just teachers that were coming up with this plan for you. Can you talk a little bit about the input that you've been able to get from other sources as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're very fortunate because our coalition, has parents, it has educators, and it also has students. Because what we have found is, students make up the majority in our district, right? In any school district, they make up the vast majority. And yet, if you speak to them, they will tell you that they are never involved in any kind of decision making, that their voices are never really centered. And they will be brutally honest. Sometimes people ask them. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Sometimes they're asked or they get sent a survey, but they really see right through that. They see that that is not authentic engagement. And so in our district, we have been working with students over the last several years on different issues. And so, when they joined the coalition, they really brought their perspective in terms of how this pandemic has affected them. And, they've been very clear and very, advocated for what they need as students.
That's so, that's just so fun to consider what that table must be like to have all those voices there. Has the school district responded in any way to you?
So we do have our Superintendent Martinez has agreed to meet with us and members of the coalition. Our blueprint is really meant to serve as a point for locals across the city to begin conversation with their district leadership. And so I'm sure other locals that are involved, have also brought the blueprint to their district leadership, and those meetings are taking place. And I think, for us, one of the first things that the blueprint states is the CDC guidelines that talks about what community transmission looks like and how that should be one of the very first considerations when you're talking about whether you should physically report back to campuses.
Okay, so wait a second. I want to get this right. Okay, I don't want to misunderstand. Are you saying that actually listening to scientists is something that should be part of a plan to go back to school? I mean, is that the position the union is taking? And if so, how do you square that with what the Texas Education Agency has done?
Yeah, we are taking a firm stand in the corner of science on this. And I think one of the things that's really disappointing about the TEA is that, what we see is a politicization of this issue, right? And I think for those of us on the ground, we see what's happening in our community, and especially in a place like San Antonio, where for so long we were in a, it was a challenging time, but we felt like we were doing what we needed to do. We felt like we were in a pretty good state. And now with the spike in cases, it's coming ever closer. Everyone you talk to knows someone who has it, if not someone in their immediate family. And so, for us to be relaxing our guidelines in a time when cases are spiking does not make sense to anyone.
No. So the dynamic that you just talked about is so familiar, though, because I remember at the beginning of the outbreak, we had grocery workers telling us what their lives were like, and nobody was listening to them about what was required in the stores. And politics was infecting all of these decisions that were happening and how we were opening and what we were requiring. And now to hear the same thing with folks who work in the education system, who are entrusted with the very care of our most precious resource, our children, are being subject to these political considerations that ignore their reality. And I guess I wonder, what do the members actually think about that? How do they talk about that in terms of the position it puts them in moving forward?
Yeah, so, our members, and we've been hearing from them. We held a series of rep meetings. We have representatives on all of our campuses and work sites, and we held a series of meetings 2 weeks ago to, really kind of engage them in this conversation. And they are experiencing a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, particularly when it comes to our members who may be immunocompromised themselves. They may live with someone who's immunocompromised. The idea, and I want to be clear, we all want to serve our students, right? Educators understand that being in the classroom with their students is the best way that their students learn, right? But we also understand that we have a duty to do what's in the best interest of the health and safety of our communities. And I think particularly when thinking about, that it's a risk for everyone who goes into a school building, in the midst of a pandemic. Our frontline workers, our custodians, our food service, our students, our teachers. So everyone is affected by this decision.
Yeah. So have you gotten much response from the community as a whole on the position they take? I know y'all had a press conference and you've done some other kind of online things that have kind of tried to reach out to the community. What kind of response do you think you've gotten?
Yeah, so last week we held a town hall via Zoom, and we had over 475 people register. We Facebook lived it, and we had thousands of people view it. I think in our city, people are looking for ways to engage in this really important topic and meaningful engagement, because I think what districts are doing is what they often do, which is send out a survey, collect the results, and say, okay, we're due diligence. Right, exactly. Right. Yeah. But as someone who fills out a lot of surveys in my life, we all recognize the difference between, kind of a token gesture meant to kind of check a box and meaningful, authentic engagement. And that's what we're trying to provide through our coalition work.
Right. And so, ultimately what COVID has done is it's created new problems, but it's also exposed a lot of problems that have been there throughout, in terms of unequal access to resources and things like that in our public education system. What do you think going forward is the most important thing for folks to do or to get involved in, or to be able to move forward in their own communities?
Yeah, I think, the most important thing is to be putting pressure, right? And what we are saying in our coalition is that human life has to be at the center of these decisions, that we are going to prioritize human life and health and safety above all other things. And it's really unfortunate that what we see happening in our state and in our country is the opposite of that, right? And we have people making decisions that are putting people's lives at risk for economic reasons. And we all know the truth, which is that our frontline workers, if they had the ability to stay home and continue to feed their families and provide for their families, that they would, because they know it's a risk to go out there every day. But unfortunately, they don't have that option. So what we're saying is that we should be driven by regard for human life and safety above everything else.
Yeah, and also in that respect, this election coming up, we've seen what a difference it makes to have people in office. Like we've seen, your folks on the local level have fought back against a lot of the state mandates, and the federal government certainly. But having people in office making these decisions that are willing to do that, which is to put human life first, is a really important thing. Is the union getting active in trying to make sure that the folks who represent us have that same perspective?
So we're trying to, definitely create those avenues for engagement and involvement. And I think, like you say, at the local level, we feel like the response has been, strong, and we're going to continue to push for that. And so, yeah, at the moment, we're trying to make sure that people have, entries into getting more involved into, what's happening here at the local level and beyond.
Yeah, I think your local level was great. I think County Judge Wolf, I think he won the 20 questions of I couldn't believe it when he finally said, well, we're going to impose a face mask ban anyway on businesses. And the governor said, oh, you finally understood what I was saying. Somebody finally got the secret answer, and then it changed the state for everybody. Organized people pushing back can make a difference. So yeah, I know that's been happening down in San Antonio. So Alejandra, I will just say this, that the vision that you bring to this work and the hard work that you've done to follow in your predecessor's footsteps and lay out a path for the union to really represent the entire community and be the entity that brings everything together to fight for the kids is really inspiring. And it's really exciting to hear what you're doing. And it's going to be really exciting to see what you're doing going forward. If people do want information about how you've done all this, where can they get the information, more information to kind of follow this path?
Yeah, so you can email me directly. My email is alejandra@sanantonioalliance.org. We've also just started updating our blog on our union website. So we're excited. That's something that we're going to, try to keep up to date, because we do want to make sure that people, kind of see the work that we're doing. So those are two spots, definitely.
Great. And is there anything that you would like to add? Because I think that I think people would really like hearing more. So anything else you would like to add that you think is important for people to know?
I think, what really drives our work in our union and in our coalition, right, is nothing about us without us. And I would say that in whatever community you're in, right, you have a right to be a part of the decision-making process. And that's something that everyone should be organizing around.
Yeah. Truer words were never spoken. It's so frustrating to see these things all happening to us, not with us. So thank you for adding that moment. So again, Alejandra, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for your work. And I hope that we can continue to check in and follow the work of the San Antonio Alliance and the Texas AFT, because y'all are really doing awesome work fighting for our kids and for the folks who educate them. So thank you very much for joining us. And I apologize to everybody for the internet problems I was having at the beginning. Stop yelling at me. We do the best we can here. And I think it was worth it to get to hear what Alejandra had to say. So again, thank everybody, and we'll see you next week. Stay safe and have a good 4th.
Thanks, Rick.